"Can we sleep in the barn, ma'am? It's cold," the father asked, and her reply made him cry. When Evelyn Hart opened her door that summer night, she expected nothing more than wind and darkness. Instead, she found a desperate man holding 2 infant sons, asking only for shelter in her barn. Her answer would ignite a chain of events that would bring fire, violence, and blood to her ranch, and force her to choose between safety and everything she believed about what it means to be human. If you want to see how far one choice can change everything, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The heat never really left, even after sunset. It settled into the floorboards of Evelyn Hart's ranch house like an unwanted guest, radiating up through the soles of her bare feet as she moved through the kitchen. Outside, the Texas grassland stretched endlessly in every direction, painted silver by a moon that hung low and bloated in the August sky. Crickets sang their monotonous chorus. Somewhere distant, a coyote called out, its voice swallowed by the vastness. Evelyn was used to the silence. She'd lived alone on the ranch for 3 years now, ever since her husband Thomas died. Heart gave out while he was mending a fence on the south pasture. "Just dropped like a stone," the doctor said. "Quick, painless." Those words were supposed to be a comfort, but Evelyn found no comfort in anything those first few months. The silence had been deafening then. Now it was simply her companion. She dried the last plate and set it in the cupboard, her movements efficient and practiced. 42 years old, lean and weathered by sun and work, Evelyn had learned to keep a tight routine. Structure was survival out here. Wake at dawn, tend the animals. Mend what needed mending. Eat, sleep, repeat. The ranch wasn't large, just 60 acres, a dozen cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that fought constantly against the unforgiving soil. But it was hers. Thomas had left her that much, at least. She turned down the oil lamp in the kitchen, leaving just enough light to navigate by, and was about to head upstairs when the knock came. 3 solid raps against the front door. Deliberate. Firm. Evelyn froze. Nobody came out here. The nearest neighbor was the Pritchard place, 4 miles east, and old Jim Pritchard hadn't been capable of making the journey in years. The town of Bellwood was 9 miles south, not close enough for casual visits, especially this late. It had to be past 10 o'clock. The knock came again. Patient. Persistent. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to the rifle that hung above the doorframe. She lifted it down, checked that it was loaded, it always was, and approached the door with measured steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. Fear was a luxury she'd learned to control. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice hard as iron. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, rough with exhaustion. "Ma'am, I apologize for the hour. My name is Jonah Reed. I'm traveling through with my sons, and we're in need of shelter. Just for the night, I can pay—" "I don't take boarders," Evelyn cut him off. "I'm not asking for your house, ma'am." The voice was gentle now, almost pleading. "Just the barn. Somewhere out of the wind. My boys are small. It's a long way to the next town, and I can't—" His voice cracked slightly. "I can't carry them much further tonight." Evelyn's finger rested on the trigger guard. Boys. Small. That gave her pause, but only slightly. The world was full of desperate people, and desperate people did desperate things. She'd heard stories of drifters using children as props to gain entry to lonely houses. Women alone were targets. Everyone knew that. "Ma'am?" The voice came again. "Please, I'm asking as a father, just the barn." She should turn him away. Every practical instinct screamed at her to do exactly that. But something in the man's voice, that raw edge of exhaustion, the crack when he mentioned his boys, made her hesitate. "Step back from the door," she commanded. "Into the light where I can see you." She heard footsteps retreating across the porch. Evelyn shifted to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. The man stood in the moonlight, both hands raised to show they were empty. He was tall but stooped with weariness, his clothes covered in dust that looked like it had accumulated over many miles. Dark hair, unshaven face, eyes that looked hollow even from this distance. And in his arms, 2 bundles, 2 tiny bodies wrapped in what looked like a threadbare blanket. Babies. Evelyn's breath caught. They couldn't have been more than a few months old, their small faces pressed against the man's chest. As she watched, one of them stirred and began to whimper. a thin, plaintive sound that carried clearly through the glass. The man immediately adjusted his hold, bouncing gently, murmuring something too soft for Evelyn to hear. The baby quieted. She stood there for a long moment, rifle still in hand, watching this tableau of exhaustion and desperation play out on her porch. The man didn't look threatening. He looked broken. And those babies, God help her, those babies were real. Evelyn made her decision. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack, keeping the rifle visible. "The barn," she said firmly. "There's hay in the loft. You'll find it dry and relatively clean. You leave before dawn, and you don't come near the house. Understood?" The man's shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." "God bless you. Save it?" Evelyn interrupted. "Barn's around the side. There's a water pump near the door. Don't light any fires." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." He started to turn away, then hesitated. "Ma'am, I know I'm asking a lot already, but do you have any milk for the boys? I've been feeding them creek water and whatever I could find, but I'll leave something by the pump," Evelyn said curtly. "Now go." She shut the door before he could thank her again and stood in the darkness, listening to his footsteps fade around the side of the house. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline catching up with her. She set the rifle down and pressed her palms flat against the door, breathing slowly. What had she just done? Evelyn moved to the kitchen, poured some milk into a mason jar, and added a few biscuits left over from supper. She wrapped them in cloth and stepped out the back door, making her way quickly to the barn. The man was already inside. She could hear him moving in the loft, settling the babies. She set the food and milk by the pump, then retreated to the house without looking back. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Evelyn lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. She kept the rifle on the nightstand within easy reach. The rational part of her brain said she'd done a foolish thing. The other part, the part she didn't like to acknowledge, kept hearing that baby's whimper and seeing the profound exhaustion on the man's face. Just until dawn, she told herself. Then they'd be gone, and life would return to its careful routine. But somewhere deep down, she knew that knock on the door had already changed something. The silence of her world had been broken, and she wasn't sure it could be put back together quite the same way. The sun rose hot and relentless, as it always did in August. Evelyn woke before dawn from force of habit, dressed quickly, and went downstairs with the rifle in hand. She approached the kitchen window that faced the barn and peered out, half expecting to find the man and his children already gone. But smoke rose from behind the barn, thin and controlled, just a cooking fire. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She specifically told him no fires. She grabbed the rifle and marched outside, her boots kicking up dust as she rounded the corner of the barn. The man, Jonah, he'd called himself, was crouched by a small, carefully contained fire. A dented pot sat in the embers, and he was heating what looked like the milk she'd left, testing the temperature with his finger. The two babies lay on a blanket spread across clean hay, both awake and staring up at the lightning sky with those wide, unfocused eyes that all infants had. Jonah looked up as Evelyn approached, and immediately stood, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I know you said no fires, ma'am, and I apologize, but I needed to warm the milk for the boys. It's contained. I dug a pit, lined it with stones. There's no risk to your barn." Evelyn stopped a few feet away, the rifle held loosely but ready. In the morning light, she could see Jonah more clearly. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, 32. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath sun-darkened skin. His clothes were worn but clean, patched in several places with careful stitches. His hands were calloused, marked with old scars and fresh blisters. Working hands. "You were supposed to be gone by dawn," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I know, I'm sorry. The boys needed feeding, and I wanted to thank you proper before I left." He gestured to the babies. "This is Caleb and Elijah. They're 4 months old, twins." Despite herself, Evelyn's gaze moved to the infants. They were small but looked healthy enough. Round cheeks, clear eyes, no obvious signs of illness or neglect. Their clothes were clean, if threadbare. Someone was taking care of them, at least as well as could be managed under what were clearly difficult circumstances. "Where's their mother?" The question came out before Evelyn could stop it. Jonah's face went carefully blank. Dead, ma'am. Fever took her about 3 weeks after they were born. We were in Kansas then. I've been moving south ever since, looking for work. Heard there might be opportunities in the rail yards down in Corpus Christi. That's a long way to travel on foot with 2 infants. Yes, ma'am, it is. Jonah turned back to the pot, testing the milk again. Satisfied, he pulled 2 small bottles from his pack, glass bottles with makeshift cloth nipples. He filled them carefully, not wasting a drop, then moved to the babies. Evelyn watched as he cradled one infant in each arm with practiced ease, offering them the bottles. They latched on immediately, tiny hands reaching up to grip the glass. Jonah held them with such tenderness, such complete focus, that Evelyn felt something shift uncomfortably in her chest. "You travel alone?" she heard herself ask. "Yes, ma'am. It's just the 3 of us now." "No family, friends?" Jonah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No, ma'am. Not anymore." There was a story there. Evelyn could sense it like a change in the weather, but it wasn't her business. These people would be gone within the hour, and she'd never see them again. "You know anything about ranch work?" The words surprised her as much as they clearly surprised Jonah. He looked up sharply. "Ma'am?" Evelyn shifted her weight, already second-guessing herself. "I asked if you know ranch work, fencing, animal care, general maintenance." "Yes, ma'am. I grew up on a farm in Missouri. Worked cattle, horses, crops. I can turn my hand to most things." "I've got some fence sections down on the south pasture," Evelyn said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from her against her will. "Been meaning to fix them for weeks, but it's more than I can manage alone. If you're looking for work, I could use a hand for a few days. Pay is fair. Meals included. You and the boys can stay in the barn until the job's done." Jonah stared at her like she'd just offered him the moon. "Ma'am, are you certain?" Was she? Evelyn honestly didn't know. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was foolishness. But she looked at those 2 babies, thought about them being carried mile after mile under the brutal Texas sun, and found she couldn't quite make herself send them back out onto the road. "I'm offering work, not charity," she said firmly. "You'll earn your keep, and the moment the job's done, you move on. Clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am, and thank you, truly." "You don't know what this means." "Don't thank me yet. Work starts in an hour. I'll bring breakfast out, get those boys settled, and be ready." She turned to walk away, then paused. "And put that fire out. I meant what I said about no fires near the barn." "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Evelyn stalked back to the house, acutely aware of his eyes on her back. What was she thinking? She didn't know this man from Adam. He could be anyone, a criminal, a drifter, a man running from debts or worse, and she'd just invited him to stay. But as she entered the kitchen and began pulling out ingredients for breakfast, she caught sight of her own reflection in the window glass. Her face was hard, lines carved deep by sun and sorrow. When was the last time she'd spoken more than a dozen words to another living soul? When was the last time the ranch had heard a child's cry? 3 years of silence. 3 years of existing rather than living. Maybe she was a fool, but maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of fool she needed to be. Jonah Reed proved to be a man of his word. By mid-morning, he was already deep in the south pasture, his shirt soaked with sweat as he worked to reset a fallen fence post. Evelyn watched from a distance, ostensibly checking on the cattle, but really observing this stranger she'd allowed onto her property. He worked with quiet efficiency, no wasted movements. He'd fashioned a sling from his blanket to keep one twin on his back while the other lay in a basket he'd woven from prairie grass. Impressive work, that. Every 30 minutes or so, he'd stop to check on them, switching which baby was carried and which was resting, offering water and comfort with the ease of long practice. The man was a natural father. That much was clear. "How's it coming?" Evelyn called out, approaching with a canteen of water. Jonah straightened, wincing slightly as his back protested. "Good, ma'am. This post should hold now. I'll move on to the next section after lunch." She offered him the canteen. He accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply before pouring a little water over his face and neck. "You weren't lying about knowing ranch work," Evelyn observed. A ghost of a smile crossed Jonah's face. My daddy would have tanned my hide if I'd grown up not knowing how to mend a fence. He ran a tight operation back in Missouri, 200 acres of farmland, raised corn, beans, kept a small herd of cattle. Good land, good life. What happened to it? The smile vanished. Sold it after he died. My mother had passed the year before, and I needed a fresh start. Met my wife Sarah in Kansas. We were going to start our own place, but he trailed off, his gaze moving to the babies. Fever, you said. Yes, ma'am. Came on sudden. She was fine one day, burning up the next. The doctor, his voice went rough. The doctor in that town was a drunk. By the time I found someone sober enough to help, it was too late. She died holding the boys, asking me to promise I'd keep them safe. Evelyn felt an unwelcome sting behind her eyes. I'm sorry. Thank you, ma'am. Jonah handed back the canteen. I know you didn't ask for my life story. I just want you to know I'm grateful for the work, for the chance. Most folks see a man alone with 2 babies and assume the worst. What's the worst they assume? That I stole them, that I'm not fit to care for them, that they'd be better off in an orphanage somewhere. His jaw set hard. But they're my boys, my blood, and I'll die before I let anyone take them from me. The fierce protectiveness in his voice was something Evelyn understood bone deep. She'd felt the same way about this ranch when Thomas's brother tried to claim it after the funeral, arguing that a woman couldn't possibly run it alone. Nobody's taking your boys, she said quietly. Not while you're on my land. Jonah looked at her with something approaching wonder. You're a good woman, Mrs. Hart. It's Miss, and I'm practical, not good. There's a difference. She turned away before he could respond. Lunch in an hour. Don't be late. But as she walked back to the house, she found herself thinking about those words. I'll die before I let anyone take them from me. She understood that sentiment more than Jonah could possibly know. The work fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Jonah proved invaluable, not just competent, but genuinely skilled. He repaired the fence sections, then noticed the chicken coop needed reinforcing and fixed that too. He cleared brush that had been encroaching on the water tank, reorganized the barn storage, and even managed to coax Evelyn's temperamental well pump back into proper function with nothing but patience and mechanical intuition. In return, Evelyn provided 3 solid meals a day and a safe place for him and the twins to sleep. She found herself looking forward to those meals more than she cared to admit. Jonah was soft-spoken but not silent, and he had a gift for conversation that drew her out despite her better judgment. You run this place alone? He asked one evening over supper, beans and cornbread and thick slices of ham. For 3 years now. That's impressive, ma'am. Most ranches this size need at least 2 able bodies. I manage. Oh, you do more than manage. This place is well kept. The animals are healthy. The land is cared for. He paused. Your husband taught you well. My husband taught me some of it, Evelyn corrected. The rest I learned through necessity. Turns out a woman can do most anything when the alternative is starvation. Jonah smiled at that. My Sarah used to say something similar. She once rebuilt an entire wagon axle by herself when I was laid up with a broken leg. Did it better than I could have, truth be told. She sounds like she was a capable woman. She was everything, Jonah said quietly. Then with visible effort, he changed the subject. Those are fine cattle you've got. Longhorns? Mixed breed, some Longhorn blood, some Hereford. They're hardy, which is what matters out here. They talked about cattle breeding, about the challenges of the drought that had plagued the region last summer, about the best methods for storing grain. Simple, practical conversations. But underneath it all, Evelyn felt the slow building of something she hadn't experienced in years. Companionship. It was dangerous. She knew that Jonah and his sons would be gone soon. There was no point in getting attached. But on the 4th night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant sound of Jonah singing softly to his boys in the barn, some old lullaby that drifted through the summer air, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She'd already gotten attached, and that terrified her more than any stranger at her door ever could. On the 5th day, trouble arrived in the form of family. Evelyn was in the garden, pulling weeds in the oppressive morning heat, when she heard the rattle of a wagon approaching. She looked up to see her late husband's brother, Vernon Hart, driving up the dusty track to her house. Her stomach sank. Vernon was a heavy-set man of 50-some years, with a florid face and small, calculating eyes. He'd tried to claim the ranch after Thomas died, citing some obscure family agreement that Thomas had never mentioned to Evelyn. She'd fought him in court and won, but Vernon had never quite accepted the loss. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, his gaze sweeping over the property with the proprietary air of someone who believed it should have been his. "Evelyn," he said by way of greeting. "Vernon, what brings you out here? Can a man visit his sister-in-law? You never have before." Vernon's smile was thin and cold. "I heard something interesting in town. Heard you've taken in a drifter and his bastards." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "Watch your mouth, Vernon." "It's true, then?" His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Evelyn Hart, the Ice Queen herself, harboring a strange man on her property? People are talking, sister, and what they're saying isn't charitable." "I don't care what people say." "Maybe you should." Vernon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "A woman alone, letting a strange man stay on her land. It looks improper, Evelyn. Some folks might say it calls into question your moral fitness to run this place." There it was, the real reason for his visit. "This is my land," Evelyn said coldly. "What I do on it is none of your concern." "It becomes my concern when your actions reflect poorly on the Hart name, and when your questionable decisions might provide grounds for contesting your claim to property that should have gone to family in the first place. We settled this in court, Vernon. The ranch is mine. You lost. Courts can revisit their decisions, especially when new evidence of moral turpitude comes to light." Vernon's smile was triumphant now. "A widow shacking up with a drifter not 6 months after—" "3 years, Vernon. It's been 3 years, and I'm not shacking up with anyone. I hired a man to help with work around the ranch, that's all." "Is it?" Vernon's gaze shifted past her to where Jonah had emerged from the barn, one twin on his hip. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're playing house with a man you know nothing about." "What's his story, Evelyn? Where'd he come from? What's he running from?" Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but Jonah was already approaching. His face was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Is there a problem here, Miss Hart?" he asked quietly. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Jonah Reed. I'm doing some work for Miss Hart." "Work?" Vernon said the word like it tasted foul. "What kind of work does a man with 2 babies do?" "The kind that needs doing," Jonah replied evenly. "Fence repair, maintenance, general labor." "Convenient. And where exactly did you come from, Mr. Reed?" "Kansas by way of Missouri." "Long way to travel. What brings you to Texas?" Evelyn stepped between them. "That's enough, Vernon. Mr. Reed's business is his own." "Not when he's living on Hart property. It's not." Vernon's gaze was fixed on Jonah now, assessing. "You got family, Reed? People who can vouch for you?" Something flickered across Jonah's face, too quick to read, but Evelyn caught it nonetheless. "No, sir. It's just me and my boys now." "Convenient," Vernon said again. "A man with no ties, no history, anyone can verify, shows up out of nowhere with a sob story and 2 babies he claims are his, and my soft-hearted sister-in-law takes him in without question." "I'm not soft-hearted," Evelyn snapped, "and I didn't take him in without question. I made a business arrangement. He works, he gets paid. End of story." "Is it, though?" Vernon pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket. "Because I found this interesting article from a Kansas paper. Came through town last week. There was a fire in a place called Stillwater. A man died. Authorities are looking for someone who might have information about it." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She looked at Jonah, whose face had gone carefully blank. "And you think that has something to do with Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I think it's awful coincidental. A man fleeing Kansas with 2 babies right around the time the authorities are looking for someone." Vernon smiled. "Maybe Mr. Reed should explain himself. Unless he's got something to hide." The silence stretched out, thick with tension. The baby in Jonah's arms began to fuss, sensing the atmosphere. Jonah bounced him gently, his jaw working like he was deciding something. Finally, he spoke. "The man who died in that fire was my father-in-law. Sarah's father. His name was Edmund Tate. He didn't die in an accident. He was murdered, and the fire was set to cover it up. I was there. I saw who did it. And when I tried to tell the authorities, I found out those same people had them in their pocket. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What? Sarah's father owned land, Jonah continued, his voice flat. Good land, with water rights. Some powerful men wanted it. When he wouldn't sell, they killed him and made it look like he'd fallen asleep drunk with a candle burning. I witnessed the whole thing from the barn where I was sleeping. Sarah and I were visiting with the boys. The men who did it saw me too. They know I can identify them. So you ran, Vernon said, almost gleeful. I ran to keep my sons alive, Jonah shot back, because the night after Edmund died, someone took a shot at me outside the rooming house where we were staying. The sheriff, who happens to play cards with the men who murdered Edmund, told me it was probably just kids with a rifle. That's when I knew staying meant dying. Evelyn's mind raced. Why didn't you go to federal authorities? Because I don't know who I can trust. The men behind this, they have reach, money, connections. I'm just a farmhand with 2 babies and no proof beyond my word. Jonah's voice cracked slightly. So, yes, I ran. I've been running for weeks trying to get far enough away that they'll give up looking, that my boys can be safe. Vernon was practically vibrating with satisfaction. You hear that, Evelyn? You've got a fugitive on your property, a man being hunted. And when those people he's running from come looking, and they will come looking, what do you think happens to this ranch, to you? Evelyn looked at Jonah. His face was exhausted, defeated. He expected her to send him away. She could see it in his eyes. The resignation of a man who'd been running so long he didn't remember what it felt like to be believed. Get off my property, Vernon, she said quietly. Vernon blinked. What? You heard me. Get off my land. Now. Evelyn, don't be a fool. This man is dangerous. This man is in trouble, Evelyn corrected. And he came to me asking for nothing more than a place to sleep and a chance to work. That's what I'm giving him. His past is his own business. You're making a mistake. Then it's my mistake to make. This is my land, Vernon. My decision. And you are not welcome here. Vernon's face flushed dark red. You'll regret this, Evelyn. When those men come looking and find you harboring their fugitive, you'll wish you'd listened to me. And when they do, don't come crying to family for help. I won't, Evelyn said coldly. I never have before. Vernon climbed back onto his wagon with jerky, angry movements. This isn't over. The whole county will hear about this. Your reputation will be ruined. And when it is, I'll be first in line to petition the court for control of this ranch on grounds of moral unfitness. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Evelyn and Jonah stood in silence, watching him disappear down the dusty track. When he was finally out of sight, Jonah spoke. You should have let me go. Probably. I've put you in danger. Vernon's right about that much. The people looking for me, they're serious. They're connected. If they find me here, then we'll deal with it, Evelyn interrupted. She turned to face him fully. You witnessed a murder. Those men killed your wife's father and threatened your children. That's not something you should have to run from alone. Why? Jonah's voice was raw. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? Evelyn thought about that question. The practical answer was that she shouldn't, that she was being exactly the fool Vernon accused her of being. But when she looked at Jonah, at the baby in his arms, at the desperate hope warring with fear in his eyes, she knew the real answer. Because 3 years ago, when everyone told me I couldn't hold this ranch alone, when Thomas's family tried to take it from me, when the whole town said a woman had no business trying, I did it anyway. I held this land because it was mine, because I'd earned it, because giving up wasn't in my nature. She paused. You asked for a place to rest, and I gave you work instead. You've more than earned your keep, and I'll be damned if I let a bunch of murdering bastards chase you off land where you have every right to be. Jonah stared at her like she'd just grown wings. You could lose everything. I could. But I've been alone in this fight for 3 years, Mr. Reed. Maybe it's time I had an ally. Something shifted in Jonah's expression. The defeated resignation replaced by something harder, something that looked almost like hope. Then you've got one, Miss Hart. For as long as you'll have me, you've got one. They stood there in the summer heat, 2 people with nothing but stubborn pride and nowhere else to go. and made an unspoken pact that would change both their lives forever. Neither of them knew it yet, but Vernon Hart's visit had set forces in motion that couldn't be stopped. Word would travel, questions would be asked, and the men Jonah feared, the ones with power and reach and blood on their hands, would eventually hear about a ranch in the middle of nowhere harboring the one witness who could destroy them. The storm was coming, but for now, in this moment, Evelyn Hart and Jonah Reed had each other, and sometimes that had to be enough. The days that followed Vernon's visit carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Evelyn felt it in the way the morning light seemed sharper, more revealing, in the way every sound beyond the immediate boundaries of the ranch made her pause and listen. Jonah felt it too. She could see it in the way his eyes tracked the horizon whenever he thought she wasn't looking, in the tension that never quite left his shoulders even when he was playing with the twins. But the work continued. There was no choice in that. Ranches didn't stop needing attention just because trouble might be coming. On the 6th morning after Vernon's departure, Evelyn found Jonah in the barn before dawn, already awake. He sat on a bale of hay with both babies cradled against his chest, their small bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. His own eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. Jonah's head jerked up. "Miss Hart, I didn't hear you. I didn't." "That's because you weren't listening." She stepped inside, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed him one. "You've been out here every night for the past 3 nights. I can see the lamp burning from my window. The boys wake up sometimes. I didn't want to disturb—" "Don't lie to me, Mr. Reed. You're keeping watch." Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. He took a sip of the coffee, then another, letting the silence speak for him. Evelyn settled onto a hay bale across from him. "You think they'll come?" "I think it's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots. Vernon will talk. Men like that always do. And once word gets back to Kansas that there's a man matching my description living on a ranch in Texas." He trailed off, his free hand unconsciously tightening around one of the twins. "Let me ask you something," Evelyn said. "These men who killed your father-in-law, do they have names?" Jonah hesitated. "The one who actually did it, the one I saw, his name is Garrett Boone. He's the son of Douglas Boone, who owns half of Stillwater and most of the surrounding county. Douglas wants Edmond's land for the water rights. With the drought hitting Kansas hard the past 2 years, water is worth more than gold. And the sheriff? Marcus Webb. He's been in Douglas Boone's pocket for years. Everyone knows it, but nobody says anything because the Boones control the money, and the money controls everything else. So why come after you specifically? Why not just let you run?" "Because I saw Garrett do it," Jonah said flatly. "I watched him pour kerosene around Edmund's workshop while Edmund was passed out drunk inside. Watched him light the match. Edmund woke up screaming, tried to get to the door, but Garrett had barred it from the outside. I started to run to help, but then I saw 2 other men standing guard. Boone's hired hands. They had rifles. If I'd shown myself, I'd be dead too." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What happened then?" "I stayed hidden until they left. Then I tried to break down the door, but the fire was too far gone. By the time I got it open, Edmund was—" Jonah's voice cracked. "I pulled him out anyway. Burned my hands doing it. The doctor who treated me asked questions I couldn't answer safely, so I said it was an accident. That's when I knew I had to leave." "And Sarah?" "Sarah was already gone by then. She'd died 2 weeks earlier. I was staying with Edmund, trying to help him through the grief, trying to figure out what to do with 2 newborns and no wife." Jonah looked down at the sleeping babies. "I think that's why they killed him when they did. They figured with Sarah dead and me just a son-in-law with no legal claim, there'd be no one to contest things when they forged documents saying Edmund had sold them the land before he died. Except you witnessed the murder. Except I witnessed the murder." Jonah met her eyes. "I'm not a brave man, Miss Hart. When I saw those rifles, when I realized what I was up against, I ran. I took my boys and I ran because keeping them alive mattered more than justice. That doesn't make you a coward, that makes you a father." "Does it?" Jonah's voice was bitter. "Because most nights I lie awake thinking about Edmund burning to death while I hid in the shadows. Thinking about how if I'd gone to the federal authorities instead of running, maybe you'd be dead and your sons would be orphans, Evelyn interrupted sharply. You made the choice you could live with. Don't apologize for that. Jonah studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd turn me away the moment things got complicated. Someone who'd choose safety over principle. Evelyn smiled without humor. I'm not that smart, apparently. One of the twins, Caleb, she'd learned to tell them apart by the small birthmark on his left ear, stirred and began to fuss. Jonah immediately shifted his hold, rocking gently until the baby settled back into sleep. You're good with them, Evelyn observed. I have to be. They're all I've got left of Sarah. Jonah's voice softened. She wanted so many children. Used to joke that we'd have enough to field our own baseball team. When she found out she was carrying twins, she was over the moon, scared out of her mind too, but so happy. How did you meet her? Church social in Kansas City. I was working construction, saving money to buy land. She was a school teacher, smartest woman I'd ever met. Could recite poetry from memory, do mathematics in her head that made my brain hurt. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She saw me standing in the corner like a fool, walked right up and asked if I knew how to dance. I said no. She said good, then neither of us would look stupid learning together. Despite everything, Evelyn found herself smiling. She sounds like she was something special. She was everything, Jonah said quietly. Then with visible effort, he changed the subject. What about you? How did you end up out here? Evelyn took a sip of coffee, buying time. She didn't talk about Thomas much. Didn't talk about the before times when the silence wasn't quite so heavy. But something about the pre-dawn darkness and Jonah's own honesty made the words come easier than they should have. Thomas and I met in Bellwood. I was working in the general store, and he came in to buy supplies. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who meant what he said and said what he meant. We courted for 6 months, got married, and moved out here to build the ranch. She paused. We had 3 good years before the trying started. Trying? For children. I wanted them desperately. Thomas did too. But month after month, year after year, nothing happened. We saw doctors, tried every remedy anyone suggested. Nothing worked. The old grief rose up, familiar and sharp. After 5 years, we stopped trying, accepted it was just going to be the 2 of us. And we were fine with that. We had each other, had the ranch, had a good life. Then Thomas's heart gave out, and suddenly I didn't have any of it. You had the ranch, Jonah pointed out gently. I had dirt and fence posts and 60 acres of emptiness, Evelyn corrected. The ranch was something Thomas and I built together. Without him, it was just a reminder of everything I'd lost. But you fought for it anyway. I fought for it because everyone assumed I'd fail. Thomas's family, the neighbors, half the town, they all expected me to sell and move back to civilization, and I couldn't stomach the idea of proving them right. She looked at Jonah directly. So yes, I fought. I learned to do every job Thomas used to do. I worked until my hands bled and my back screamed. I held this land because letting it go felt like letting him disappear completely. Jonah nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. That's why you let me stay. Not out of kindness, but because you recognized the fight. Maybe. Or maybe I was just tired of eating supper alone. They sat in companionable silence as the sky outside began to lighten. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. The ranch was waking up, and with it came all the demands of another day. Evelyn stood, brushing hay from her skirt. I'm riding into Bellwood today for supplies. You should come with me. Jonah's head snapped up. Miss Hart, I wasn't asking. If Vernon's been spreading talk, then people already know you're here. Hiding makes you look guilty. Better to face it head on. Let folks see you're just a man doing honest work. And if someone recognizes me? If word gets back to Kansas? Then we'll deal with it when it happens, Evelyn said firmly. But skulking around my barn like a criminal won't help anyone. Besides, I could use a second pair of hands loading supplies. And the boys need to be seen by a proper doctor. Make sure they're developing well. Jonah looked torn. Finally, he sighed. You're a stubborn woman, Miss Hart. So I've been told. We leave in an hour. Make yourself presentable. She turned to go, then paused at the barn door. And Jonah? Stop sleeping out here. There's a room off the kitchen that used to be for ranch hands. It's got a bed and a stove. You and the boys should use it. Miss Hart, I can't. You can and you will. I'm not having you collapse from exhaustion because you spent every night on watch in a barn. Her voice softened slightly. If trouble comes, we'll face it together, but killing yourself before it arrives won't help anyone. She didn't wait for his response, just headed back toward the house with the sunrise breaking golden over the eastern hills. The ride into Bellwood took nearly 2 hours by wagon. Evelyn drove while Jonah sat beside her, the twins secured in a makeshift carrier he'd rigged between them. The landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown, broken occasionally by clusters of scrub oak or the dark line of a distant creek bed. They didn't talk much during the journey. Jonah seemed lost in thought, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon. Evelyn understood the instinct. She'd lived with that same vigilance for 3 years, always watching for the next challenge, the next threat to her carefully maintained independence. Bellwood came into view just before noon, a cluster of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street. It wasn't much: a general store, a saloon, a church, a doctor's office, a handful of houses. But it was the only civilization for 20 miles in any direction. Evelyn pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store. Immediately she felt eyes turning their way. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house. Old Jim Pritchard, despite what Evelyn had thought about his mobility. 3 men she didn't recognize, probably ranch hands from one of the larger spreads. And Vernon Hart, standing outside the saloon with a satisfied smile on his florid face. "Stay close," Evelyn murmured to Jonah, "and don't let them see you sweat." They climbed down from the wagon. Jonah lifted the carrier with the twins while Evelyn grabbed her shopping list. Together they walked into the general store. The proprietor, Henry Walsh, looked up from his counter. His expression flickered through surprise, curiosity, and something that might have been concern before settling into professional courtesy. "Miss Hart, good to see you." "Henry, I need flour, sugar, coffee, and ammunition, and whatever vegetables you've got that aren't wilted." "Of course." Henry's gaze slid to Jonah. "And who might this be?" "Jonah Reed. He's working for me." Evelyn's tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "I see." Henry began pulling items from the shelves. "I heard you'd taken on help. Vernon mentioned it." "I'm sure he did." "Folks are talking, Evelyn." "Folks always talk, Henry, usually about things that aren't their business." Henry had the grace to look embarrassed. He finished gathering her supplies in silence, tallying up the cost. Evelyn paid, and Jonah loaded the goods into the wagon with quick efficiency. As they were finishing, Dr. Samuel Brennan emerged from his office across the street. He was a thin, severe-looking man in his 60s, but his hands were steady and his mind sharp. He'd been the one to pronounce Thomas dead. "Miss Hart," he called out, "might I have a word?" Evelyn tensed but nodded. "Doctor?" Brennan approached, his eyes taking in Jonah and the twins with clinical assessment. "I understand you have infants on your property. May I examine them, just to ensure they're healthy?" It wasn't quite a request. Jonah looked at Evelyn, who nodded slightly. "Of course, doctor," Jonah said carefully. "They're 4 months old. Twins. I've been doing my best to care for them, but a professional opinion would be welcome." Brennan's expression softened fractionally. "Bring them to my office." The examination took 20 minutes. Brennan checked both babies thoroughly, listening to their hearts, examining their reflexes, testing their responses. When he finished, he actually smiled. "They're remarkably healthy, Mr. Reed, well-fed, well-cared for. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Jonah's relief was palpable. "Thank you, doctor. Though I would recommend supplementing their milk with some mashed vegetables soon. They're at the age where they can start taking soft foods." Brennan pulled out a small jar from his cabinet. "This is cod liver oil. Give them each a small spoonful daily. It'll help with their development." "I can't pay—" "Consider it a courtesy," Brennan interrupted. "Any man who takes such good care of his children in difficult circumstances deserves support, not obstacles." Evelyn felt a rush of gratitude toward the old doctor. "Thank you, Samuel." Brennan turned to her. "Though I hope you know what you're doing, Evelyn. Vernon's been quite vocal about his concerns." "Vernon's concerns are noted and disregarded. Be careful. He's talking about filing legal challenges to your ownership of the ranch." "Let him try. I won the case once. I'll win it again." Brennan sighed. You're as stubborn as your husband was. He'd be proud of you." They left the doctor's office to find a small crowd had gathered near the wagon. Vernon stood at its center, holding court like a politician. "Not proper," he was saying. "A widow woman living with a strange man. It's an affront to decency." "That's enough, Vernon," Evelyn said sharply as she approached. Vernon turned, his smile widening. "Ah, there she is. Tell them, Evelyn. Tell them about your house guest." "Mr. Reed is my employee, nothing more. I hired him to help with ranch work. That's all anyone needs to know." "Is it?" Vernon's voice carried across the small crowd. "What about the fact that he's running from the law? That there are men looking for him in Kansas?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. Jonah's face went carefully blank. "He's not running from the law," Evelyn said coldly. "He's running from murderers. There's a difference." "So he admits it." Vernon looked triumphant. "He admits men are hunting him." "Men are hunting him because he witnessed a crime," Evelyn shot back. "Because he saw powerful people do terrible things, and instead of protecting him, the local authorities in Kansas chose to protect the criminals. Mr. Reed is a victim, not a criminal." "That's his story," Vernon sneered. "Do we have any proof? Any evidence beyond the word of a drifter?" Jonah stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying. "No, sir. You don't. All you have is my word that I saw Garrett Boone murder Edmund Tate in cold blood, that I watched him burn a man alive to steal his land, that I've been running for weeks because the men who did it have the power to make me disappear too." The crowd had gone silent. Jonah continued, his hand resting protectively on the carrier with his sons. "I understand your suspicion. If I were you, I'd be suspicious too. A stranger shows up with a story about murder and corruption, asking for shelter. It sounds like a con, but I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just asking to be left alone to work honestly and raise my boys in peace. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted." There was power in his simplicity. Evelyn could see it in the way the crowd's hostility wavered, replaced by uncertainty. "Mrs. Patterson spoke up. Those babies look well cared for." "They are," Dr. Brennan confirmed. "I just examined them. Mr. Reed is doing an excellent job." Vernon's face was darkening. "This is absurd. You're all willing to risk your safety, your property values for the sake of some stranger's sob story?" "I'm willing to give a man the benefit of the doubt," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Something you might try, Vernon Hart." "And I'm willing to trust Evelyn's judgment," added Jim Pritchard. "She's kept that ranch running for 3 years against all odds. If she says this man is worth defending, that's good enough for me." Vernon looked around at the crowd, realizing he was losing them. His expression turned ugly. "Fine. Protect him. But when those men he's running from show up, and they will show up, don't come crying to me when your town burns down around you." He stormed off toward his wagon, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Evelyn felt Jonah beside her, trembling slightly. She touched his arm briefly. "Let's go home," she said quietly. They loaded into the wagon and drove out of Bellwood with the eyes of the entire town following them. Neither spoke until they were well clear of the last buildings. "They defended me," Jonah finally said, his voice wondering. "Some did." "Why?" "Because people aren't always what you expect them to be. Some are worse. Some are better." Evelyn kept her eyes on the road ahead. "The question is, what happens when Vernon's prediction comes true? When the men hunting you actually arrive?" Jonah was quiet for a long moment. "Then I face them. And I make sure my boys are somewhere safe first." "Your boys will be safe," Evelyn said. "On my land, under my protection, same as you." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the heavy silence of strangers, but the comfortable silence of people who'd begun to trust each other. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting. They unloaded the supplies together, moving with the easy coordination of a team that had worked together for years instead of days. When everything was stored, Jonah took the twins inside to the room Evelyn had offered him that morning. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching him settle the babies into a makeshift crib he'd fashioned from an old drawer padded with blankets. "Miss Hart?" Jonah said without turning around. "Yes?" Thank you for standing up for me today, for believing me when you have no reason to. I have plenty of reasons. You've worked hard, you've been honest, you've shown me nothing but respect. She paused. And those men who killed your father-in-law, they remind me of every person who's tried to take something from me just because they had the power to do it. So maybe I'm defending you, or maybe I'm fighting my own battles. Hard to say. Jonah turned to face her. Either way, I'm grateful. Don't be grateful yet. Vernon was right about one thing. Trouble's coming. The only question is when. As if in response, one of the twins began to cry. Jonah immediately lifted him, rocking gently. Evelyn watched for a moment longer, then turned away. She had her own preparations to make. If men were coming, she'd be ready. This ranch had survived drought, debt, and death. It would survive this too. It had to. Because somewhere between that first knock on her door and this moment, standing in the threshold watching a father comfort his sons, Evelyn had stopped being alone. She had something to protect beyond just land and pride. She had people who depended on her. And she'd be damned before she let them down. The trouble came 3 weeks later, not with the thunder of hooves or the crack of gunfire, but with smoke on the wind. Evelyn woke to the smell of it just before dawn. She was on her feet before her mind fully registered what had pulled her from sleep, reaching for the rifle that now lived beside her bed. Through the window, the eastern sky showed the first gray hints of morning, but to the south, an orange glow pulsed against the darkness like a malignant heartbeat. Fire. She was dressed and out the door in less than a minute, her boots pounding across the hard-packed earth toward the barn. Jonah was already outside, the twins bundled in his arms, his face illuminated by the distant flames. "South pasture," he said tersely. "Started maybe 10 minutes ago. I saw the glow and got the boys out." Evelyn's mind raced. The south pasture bordered the creek bed, which was bone dry this time of year. If the fire jumped to the grassland beyond, it could spread for miles. But more importantly, that pasture held 6 of her 12 cattle and was separated from the main ranch by a fence line that Jonah had just repaired 2 weeks ago. "Did you see anyone?" "No, but fires don't start themselves, Miss Hart." Their eyes met in the pre-dawn darkness, and Evelyn saw her own realization reflected back at her. This wasn't an accident. "Take the boys to the root cellar," she ordered. "It's stone, fire can't touch it. Stay there until I come for you." "I'm not hiding while you—" "Those babies need their father alive," Evelyn cut him off. "And I need you to trust that I can handle this. Please, Jonah." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded, already moving toward the small stone structure built into the hillside behind the house. Evelyn didn't wait to watch him go. She ran for the barn, grabbed 2 heavy blankets and soaked them in the water trough, then threw them over her shoulders and headed toward the flames. The fire had caught in a section of dry brush near the fence line, exactly where it would do the maximum damage with minimum risk to whoever set it. Evelyn could see the logic immediately. Far enough from the main buildings that she'd have to choose between saving structures or saving cattle, close enough to the grazing land that her herd would panic and scatter. It was meant to hurt her, financially and practically, without being obviously arson. But whoever said it hadn't counted on Evelyn Hart being raised by a father who'd taught her fire management on the Kansas prairie. She used one soaked blanket to beat at the flames spreading toward the grass, while kicking dirt and dry soil onto the base of the fire. The heat was intense, searing her face and hands, but she'd felt worse working under the Texas sun. She worked methodically, containing the spread first, then attacking the heart of the blaze. She was making progress when she heard hoofbeats. Evelyn spun, the wet blanket still in her hands, and saw 3 riders emerging from the darkness. They stopped just outside the fire's light, silhouettes against the graying sky. One of them leaned forward in his saddle, and even in the dim light, Evelyn could see the smile on his face. "Looks like you got yourself a problem, ma'am," the rider called out. His voice was smooth, educated, with just a hint of southern drawl underneath. "Fires can be dangerous this time of year. Awful dangerous." Evelyn dropped the blanket and reached for the rifle she'd propped against a fence post. She didn't point it at them, not yet, but the meaning was clear. "Who are you?" "Name's Garrett Boone," the man said, and Evelyn's blood went cold. "I'm looking for someone. Fellow by the name of Jonah Reed. Heard he might be in these parts." So it had finally happened. The hunters had found their prey. Evelyn kept her voice steady. Don't know anyone by that name. Now that's interesting, Garrett said, urging his horse a few steps closer. In the growing light, she could see him better now. A man in his late 20s, handsome in a cruel way, wearing clothes too fine for ranch country. Because my sources tell me a man matching his description has been working for you. Man with 2 baby boys. Seems mighty specific to be a coincidence. Your sources are mistaken. Are they? Garrett's smile widened. See, I don't think they are. I think you're harboring a fugitive, Miss Hart. That's a serious offense. Could get you in a lot of trouble. He's not a fugitive. You are. The smile vanished. Excuse me? You heard me, Evelyn said, her voice hard as iron. Jonah Reed told me what you did, how you murdered Edmund Tate in cold blood, how you burned him alive to steal his land. That makes you a killer, Mr. Boone, not him. Garrett's expression went dangerously cold. That's a hell of an accusation to make without proof. I don't need proof to call a thing what it is. One of the other riders moved his hand toward his belt. Evelyn raised the rifle in a smooth, practiced motion, sighting down the barrel directly at Garrett's chest. I wouldn't, she said quietly. Garrett held up a hand, stopping his companion. Easy now. No need for violence. We're all civilized people here. Civilized people don't burn down other people's property in the middle of the night. I don't know what you're talking about, Garrett said, but his eyes betrayed him. We just happened to be riding past, saw the smoke, thought we'd check on you. Neighborly concern. You're no neighbor of mine, and you need to leave my land, now. Garrett studied her for a long moment, weighing options. Finally, he nodded slowly. We'll go. For now. But you should think carefully about your choices, Miss Hart. Harboring Reed puts you in the middle of something that doesn't concern you, something dangerous. Everything on this land concerns me, including who I allow to stay here. Then you're choosing to make this your fight. I'm choosing to protect what's mine. If that makes it a fight, so be it. Garrett's smile returned, colder than before. You're brave. I'll give you that. Or maybe just foolish. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. He turned his horse. We'll be seeing you again, Miss Hart, real soon. The 3 riders melted back into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Evelyn standing alone with the dying fire and the rapid hammering of her heart. She waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before lowering the rifle, her hands shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. The fire had burned itself out, leaving a blackened scar across 20 yards of pasture and fence line. The damage was contained but visible, a clear message written in ash and char. They'd been here. They could come back. They could do worse. Evelyn made her way back to the root cellar. Jonah was standing in the doorway, the twin still in his arms, his face pale in the growing daylight. I heard voices, he said. Garrett Boone. He came with 2 others. Jonah closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should never have... Stop, Evelyn interrupted. This isn't your fault. They did this, not you. But they did it because of me, because I'm here. Jonah's voice was raw with guilt. I should leave, before they burn down more than just a pasture, before someone gets killed. Where would you go? They found you here. They'll find you anywhere else. Then at least you'd be safe. Evelyn stepped close enough that Jonah had no choice but to meet her eyes. Listen to me. 3 years ago, when Thomas died, everyone told me to give up this ranch, told me I couldn't hold it alone, that I'd fail, that I should just accept defeat and move on. And you know what I did? You fought. I fought like hell. Not because I thought I'd win, but because losing without a fight wasn't something I could live with. She paused. Those men out there, they think they can scare me off my own land. They think burning a pasture will make me hand you over. They're wrong. They'll escalate. Tonight was a warning. Next time we'll be ready. Evelyn turned toward the house. Come on, we have work to do. Over the next 2 days, Evelyn and Jonah transformed the ranch into something approaching a fortress. They moved the cattle closer to the main buildings where they could be watched. They positioned barrels of water at strategic points around the property. Evelyn taught Jonah to shoot, spending hours at makeshift targets until he could hit a tin can at 50 yards. They also sent word to Jim Pritchard and Dr. Brennan in Bellwood, explaining the situation. Evelyn didn't ask for help directly, but the message was clear. If things went wrong, someone needed to know what had happened and why. The response came faster than expected. On the third day after the fire, Jim Pritchard arrived with his 2 grown sons, both of them armed with rifles. Mrs. Patterson came too, bringing food and her own shotgun, declaring that if men were going to act like animals, they'd find out what civilized women could do when riled. "You don't have to do this," Evelyn said, overwhelmed by the show of support. "Yes, we do," Jim replied simply. "You're one of us, and those bastards burned your land. That's not something we tolerate around here." Even Dr. Brennan showed up, riding in on his old mare with a medical bag and a pistol. "Someone's going to get hurt before this is over," he said matter-of-factly. "Might as well have a doctor on hand." Only Vernon stayed away, though word reached them that he was in Bellwood, making dark predictions about the violence Evelyn was bringing down on innocent people. That night they kept watch in shifts. Evelyn took the first watch with Jim's eldest son, a quiet man named Daniel who'd learned to shoot hunting coyotes. They sat on the porch, rifles across their laps, watching the darkness for movement. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked quietly. Daniel shrugged. "My pa says you gave a man shelter when he needed it. Says you stood up to bullies when you could have turned away. That's reason enough." "You don't even know Jonah." "Don't need to. I know you, Miss Hart, and I know men like this Boone character. They think they can take what they want because they've got money and guns. Someone needs to show them different." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She wasn't alone anymore. These people, her neighbors, had chosen to stand with her. The attack came just after midnight. It started with the sound of breaking glass, the window of the barn shattering inward. Then flames erupted, bright and hungry, spreading across the hay with terrifying speed. Someone had thrown a torch, maybe 2, through the broken window. "Fire!" Daniel shouted, already moving. The ranch erupted into controlled chaos. Jim and his other son grabbed blankets and ran for the barn. Mrs. Patterson began working the pump, filling buckets. Dr. Brennan helped Jonah move the twins to the root cellar again, then took up a position by the house with his pistol. Evelyn ran toward the barn with her rifle, searching the darkness for the attackers. She found them quickly enough. 4 riders circling the property, staying just out of rifle range, watching their handiwork. Garrett Boone sat his horse at the front, clearly visible in the firelight. He raised his hand in a mocking salute. That was his mistake. Evelyn raised her rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The bullet passed close enough to Garrett's head that he jerked sideways, his horse rearing. She fired again, this time at the rider to his left, deliberately missing but making them scatter. "Anyone else comes on my land gets shot," Evelyn shouted into the darkness. "Not near them, through them. You hear me?" From behind her, Jim's boys and Mrs. Patterson added their own rifle fire, creating a wall of sound and fury that drove the riders back. They retreated beyond the fence line but didn't leave, clearly waiting to see if the fire would do what they'd intended. It nearly did. The barn was old, dry, perfect fuel for flames, but Evelyn and her defenders worked with desperate efficiency, using wet blankets and bucket chains to contain the blaze. Jonah appeared from the root cellar despite Evelyn's orders, working alongside them with his shirt wrapped around his face against the smoke. They fought the fire for 2 hours, choking and burning and refusing to give up. And slowly, impossibly, they won. The barn stood damaged but intact. One wall blackened and the hayloft partially collapsed, but salvageable. As dawn broke, the riders were gone. Only ash and exhaustion remained. Evelyn stood in the ruins of her barn, covered in soot, her hands blistered and bleeding. Around her, her neighbors looked equally battered. But they'd held the line. They'd saved the barn. They'd sent a message that this land would not fall quietly. "They'll come back," Jim said, stating the obvious. "I know. Next time they might not just burn property. Next time they might come shooting." "I know that too." Jim looked at her steadily. "You prepared for that? For people to die over this?" Evelyn thought about that question. About Jonah and his boys sleeping in her house. About the principle of the thing, that a woman should be able to offer shelter without fear, that a man should be able to work honestly without being hunted. that murderers shouldn't be allowed to terrorize people just because they had money and power. I'm prepared to defend what's mine, she said finally. If that means standing against people who think violence gives them rights, then yes, I'm prepared. Jim nodded slowly. Then you've got our support, all of us. Right, boys? Daniel and his brother both nodded. Mrs. Patterson crossed her arms. Those men want a war. They'll get one. But it won't be the easy victory they're expecting. Dr. Brennan cleaned his glasses, his hands remarkably steady. I took an oath to preserve life, but I also believe in standing against evil when I see it. Count me in. Jonah emerged from the barn, his face streaked with ash. He looked at Evelyn, then at the assembled group. You're all risking your lives for me. For my boys. I don't know how to Don't, Mrs. Patterson cut him off. This stopped being just about you days ago. This is about whether we let men like Garrett Boone dictate how we live. And speaking for myself, I've had quite enough of men telling me what I can and cannot do. Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. Amen to that. They spent the rest of the day fortifying. Jim's boys reinforced the barn with fresh lumber. Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Brennan created a proper infirmary in the house, stocking it with bandages and medicine. Evelyn and Jonah checked every sight line, every approach to the ranch, planning fields of fire and fallback positions like generals preparing for siege. That evening, as the sun set blood-red over the scorched pasture, Evelyn found Jonah sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. The twins slept in their carrier beside him, peaceful and unaware of the violence swirling around them. You should eat something, Evelyn said, sitting down beside him. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway, you'll need your strength. Jonah turned to look at her. This is insane, all of this. People you've known for years are putting their lives on the line because I saw something I shouldn't have seen. They're putting their lives on the line because it's the right thing to do. Is it though? Jonah's voice was anguished. What if someone dies tomorrow? What if Mrs. Patterson gets shot defending my boys? How do I live with that? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. 3 years ago, when Thomas died, I wanted to die too. Not in any active way, but I just stopped caring, stopped seeing the point. This ranch became a prison I maintained out of spite more than love. What changed? You knocked on my door, Evelyn said simply. You and those boys. And for the first time in 3 years, I had a reason to fight that wasn't just about proving people wrong. I had people depending on me, people who needed protecting. Oh, she looked at the sleeping twins. You gave me that. So don't apologize for it. Even if people get hurt? Even then. Because the alternative, turning you away, letting those bastards think they can terrorize anyone they want, that's worse than the risk. She paused. Besides, you're not responsible for Garrett Boone's choices. He chose to murder Edmund Tate. He chose to hunt you. He chose to come here and burn my property. Those are his sins, not yours. Jonah was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Sarah used to say that standing up for what's right isn't supposed to be easy. That if it were easy, everyone would do it. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Jonah smiled sadly. She would have liked you, I think. You're both stubborn in the same way. I'll take that as a compliment. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the darkness, Garrett Boone and his men were planning their next move. But here, on this porch, with allies sleeping in the house and babies breathing softly in their carrier, there was peace. It wouldn't last, they both knew that. But for this moment, it was enough. The second attack came 2 days later, and it wasn't subtle. Evelyn woke to the sound of gunfire, bullets punching through the walls of her house and sending splinters flying. She rolled out of bed, grabbed her rifle, and crawled to the window. Outside in the gray light just before dawn, she counted at least 8 riders circling the property, firing at will. This wasn't a warning. This was an assault. Everyone down! Jim Pritchard's voice bellowed from the next room. Return fire! The ranch erupted into violence. Evelyn took up a position at the window, sighting carefully and squeezing off shots at the circling riders. She saw one man jerk in his saddle, hit in the shoulder, saw another horse stumble as a bullet caught its leg. The riders broke their circle, seeking cover behind the barn and fence lines. From across the house, she heard Mrs. Patterson's shotgun boom, heard Daniel and his brother firing in controlled bursts. This was warfare, plain and simple, and everyone involved knew it. Jonah appeared at her doorway, wild-eyed. "The boys, root cellar," Evelyn commanded. "Now! Stay there no matter what you hear." "I can help. Your boys need you alive more than we need another gun. Go!" Jonah hesitated, then disappeared. Evelyn turned back to the window, searching for targets. She found Garrett Boone himself, standing near the damaged barn with a rifle in his hands. He was shooting at the house methodically, like a man performing a chore. Evelyn lined up her sights and fired. The bullet caught Garrett in the side, spinning him around. He went down, clutching his ribs, and immediately his men abandoned their positions to converge on him. Within seconds, they were retreating, carrying their wounded leader between them, firing blindly back at the house as they fled. The ranch fell silent except for the ringing in everyone's ears and the distant thunder of hoofbeats fading into the morning. Evelyn lowered her rifle, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd shot a man. She'd actually shot another human being. The knowledge should have horrified her, but all she felt was grim satisfaction. "Everyone all right?" Jim called out. A chorus of affirmatives came back. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the hallway, her face pale, but her jaw set. "Nobody hurt on our side. Can't say the same for them." Dr. Brennan emerged from his makeshift infirmary. "I heard at least one scream. Someone's wounded out there." "Good," Evelyn said coldly. Then, seeing their expressions, she added, "They came to kill us. I won't apologize for defending my home." "Nobody's asking you to," Jim said. "But we need to think about what comes next. You shot Garrett Boone. That changes things." "How?" "His father's one of the richest men in Kansas. This was personal before. Now it's blood feud." Jim moved to the window, surveying the damage. "They'll come back with more men, more guns, and they won't stop until either we're all dead or they are." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a shroud. Evelyn had known this fight would escalate, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Then we need to make sure we're ready," she said quietly. "And we need to make sure the right people know what's happening here. If we're going to fight, it needs to be in the open where everyone can see it." "What are you thinking?" Dr. Brennan asked. Evelyn's mind was already working, seeing angles and possibilities. "We send word to the federal marshal in San Antonio. We document everything, the fires, the attacks, the murder Jonah witnessed. We make this public enough that the Boones can't make it disappear." "That could take days, maybe weeks." "Then we hold out that long. We make this ranch too costly to take, too public to destroy quietly." She looked around at her defenders, these people who'd chosen to stand with her. "Anyone who wants to leave, I understand. This is my fight, not yours." Nobody moved. Mrs. Patterson actually laughed. "Honey, we're past the point of backing out now. Those men shot at my house too. This is everyone's fight now." And so they prepared for war. The messenger rode out at first light, a young ranch hand from the Pritchard spread, who volunteered to make the 3-day journey to San Antonio. He carried a letter written in Evelyn's careful hand detailing everything: Edmund Tate's murder, Jonah's testimony, the fires, the attacks, Garrett Boone's assault on her property. It was evidence, documentation, the kind of paper trail that couldn't be easily buried or ignored. But 3 days was an eternity when men with guns wanted you dead. They fortified what they could. Jim's sons dug rifle pits at strategic points around the property, creating defensive positions with clear sight lines. Mrs. Patterson organized the house like a military hospital, establishing supply caches and escape routes. Dr. Brennan inventoried his medical supplies with the grim efficiency of a man who'd seen battlefield casualties before, and Evelyn drilled everyone on fields of fire, fallback positions, and what to do if the main house became untenable. Jonah watched all this with growing horror. On the second day after the shooting, he approached Evelyn while she was reinforcing the shutters on the south-facing windows. "This has to stop," he said without preamble. Evelyn didn't look up from her work. "What has to stop?" "All of this. The preparations for battle, He gestured helplessly at the transformed ranch. "You're turning your home into a war zone because of me. I'm protecting what's mine. There's a difference." "Is there?" Jonah's voice rose. "Because from where I'm standing, you're about to get people killed over a fight that isn't yours." Now Evelyn did look up, her eyes hard. You think this isn't my fight? They burned my pasture. They shot at my house. They tried to terrorize me off my own land. That makes it my fight, Jonah Reed, whether you like it or not. But it started because of me, because I'm here. And it continues because Garrett Boone and his father think they can do whatever they want to, whoever they want. That's not on you, that's on them. She returned to the shutters. Besides, you don't get to decide when I stop fighting. That's my choice to make. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then, softer. What if I left? Just took the boys and moved on? Would they follow, or would they leave you alone? You think men like the Boones forget witnesses? You think they'd let you walk away just because you're not here anymore? Evelyn shook her head. They'd hunt you to the ends of the earth, and then they'd come back here anyway to make sure I couldn't testify about what they did to my property. Running doesn't end this. It just delays it. Then what does end it? Evelyn set down her hammer and looked at him directly. Standing our ground, making this so public, so documented, so witnessed by so many people that the Boones can't make it disappear, making the cost of victory higher than they're willing to pay. And if that doesn't work, if they're willing to pay any cost, then we make them pay it in blood and fire until they break. Her voice was iron. I'm not running, Jonah. Not from my own land. Not from men who think violence makes them right. If they want this ranch, they'll have to take it from my cold, dead hands. Jonah stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. Sarah said something similar once, when her father tried to forbid her from marrying me. Said he'd have to drag her kicking and screaming to stop her, and even then she'd find a way. What did he do? Gave in, realized he couldn't stop her any more than he could stop the sun from rising. Jonah's smile faded. But he also told me that stubborn women either change the world or break themselves trying. No middle ground. He sounds like he knew his daughter well. He did. And I think he'd recognize you as kin. Jonah picked up a hammer. So if you're staying and fighting, then I'm staying and fighting too. No more talk of me leaving. We see this through together. Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. Together then. Now help me with these shutters before the Boones decide to pay us another visit. They worked in companionable silence, two people preparing for war with nothing but determination and the stubborn refusal to give up what was theirs. The attack came that night. Not with guns this time, but with fire. Real fire. Not the contained burns meant to send messages. This was a conflagration meant to consume everything. Evelyn woke to an orange glow so bright it turned night into hellish day. Someone had set the dried grass around the entire southern perimeter ablaze, creating a wall of flame that raced toward the ranch buildings with terrifying speed. The wind, which had been calm all day, now blew from the south like it had been summoned specifically for this purpose. Fire! The shout came from Daniel Pritchard's position. Everyone up! Fire on all sides! Evelyn was moving before she was fully awake, grabbing buckets and blankets, shouting orders. But even as she ran outside, she knew this fire was beyond their ability to stop. It was too big, too fast, fed by weeks of dry grass and summer heat. Forget the pastures, Jim Pritchard bellowed. Protect the buildings. Wet down everything. They worked with desperate efficiency, forming bucket chains from the well to the house and barn, dousing walls and roofs with precious water. The heat was intense, a physical force that drove them back even as they fought to hold their ground. Smoke filled the air, choking and blinding. Through the chaos, Evelyn saw riders on the far side of the flames, shadows moving deliberately, making sure the fire stayed contained to the ranch, making sure there was no escape route. They weren't trying to kill everyone directly. They were trying to burn them out, to destroy the ranch so completely that there'd be nothing left worth defending. The cattle! Mrs. Patterson screamed. They're trapped in the near pasture. Evelyn's heart sank. 6 head of cattle, panicked by the flames, running in circles in a paddock that would soon be engulfed. Losing them would be a financial blow she might never recover from, but going after them through that fire would be suicide. Jonah made the decision for her. He grabbed a soaked blanket, wrapped it around himself, and ran toward the paddock gate before anyone could stop him. "Jonah, no!" Evelyn shouted, but he was already gone, a dark figure moving through smoke and flame. She watched in helpless terror as he reached the gate, threw it open, and began driving the cattle toward the gap in the flames where the wind had momentarily shifted. The animals, wild with fear, stampeded in every direction. Jonah moved among them like a man possessed, slapping flanks, shouting, forcing them toward safety through sheer will. 4 cattle made it through, then 5. The 6th, a young heifer, balked at the flames, turning back into the burning paddock. Jonah went after her. "Leave her!" Evelyn screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of the fire. She could only watch as Jonah grabbed the heifer's halter, pulling and pushing, using every ounce of strength to force the terrified animal toward the opening. The flames were closing in, the gap narrowing by the second. They made it through with inches to spare, Jonah's blanket smoking, his hair singed, the heifer wild-eyed but alive. He collapsed in the dirt, coughing violently, and Evelyn was there, pulling him away from the heat, checking him for burns. "You damn fool," she said, her voice shaking. "You could have been killed." "Couldn't let them take everything," Jonah gasped between coughs. "Not without a fight." The fire burned itself out over the next 2 hours, consuming the pasture land but failing to take the buildings. By dawn, the ranch stood like an island in a sea of blackened earth, damaged but defiant. Smoke still rose from smoldering patches of grass, and the smell of burning hung thick in the air. They had survived. Barely. But the cost was brutal. Half the pasture land was destroyed. The fences were gone. The grass that fed the cattle was ash. Even if they survived the boons, Evelyn wasn't sure the ranch could survive this damage. As the sun rose over the devastation, Vernon Hart arrived with a wagon and a triumphant expression. He surveyed the scorched earth with barely concealed satisfaction. My, he said, climbing down. "Looks like those men you're harboring have brought you to ruin, Evelyn, just like I warned." Evelyn, covered in soot and exhausted beyond measure, gave him a look that could have cut glass. "What do you want, Vernon?" "I'm here with an offer, a generous offer, considering." He pulled out a folded document. "I'm willing to buy the ranch from you, not for what it was worth before all this trouble, of course, but enough to let you start over somewhere else, somewhere safe." "You want me to sell you my land?" "I want to save you from complete destruction. This ranch is finished, Evelyn. Even if you survive the boons, and that's a mighty big if, you'll never recover from this damage. You'll spend years trying to rebuild, only to fail anyway." Vernon's voice took on an oily sympathy. "Let me take this burden from you. Sell to me now, walk away with something, and put all this unpleasantness behind you." Evelyn looked at the offered document, then at Vernon's eager face, then at the scorched earth surrounding them. She thought about 3 years of fighting, of refusing to give up, of holding this land through drought and debt and death. She thought about Jonah and his boys sleeping in her house, about Mrs. Patterson and Jim Pritchard and all the others who'd stood with her. Then she took the document from Vernon's hand, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall to the blackened ground. "My answer is no. My answer will always be no. This is my land, Vernon, mine, and I will hold it until the day I die, and not you or the Boones or anyone else will take it from me." Vernon's face went purple with rage. "You're insane! You're going to get everyone who's helping you killed." "Then that's our choice to make. Now get off my property before I add you to the list of people who've threatened me." Vernon climbed back onto his wagon, his hands shaking with fury. "When you're dead and this ranch is in ashes, don't say I didn't warn you." He whipped his horses into motion, the wagon rattling away across the burned landscape. Evelyn watched him go, feeling nothing but a cold satisfaction. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest," Jim Pritchard said from behind her. "Probably both," Evelyn admitted, "but I meant every word." The next morning brought unexpected reinforcements. Evelyn was checking the damage to the barn when she heard wagons approaching, not 1, but 4. She grabbed her rifle out of habit, then lowered it as she recognized the faces. Henry Walsh, from the general store. Old Jim Pritchard's neighbors, the Morrison family. Sarah Chen, who ran the boarding house in Bellwood. Even the blacksmith, a massive man named Thomas Ironwood, who rarely left his forge for any reason. They came bearing supplies, lumber, nails, food, water barrels, ammunition. They came bearing news. Vernon had tried to rally the town against Evelyn, but his transparent attempt to profit from her troubles had backfired spectacularly. Most of Bellwood, it turned out, didn't appreciate outsiders burning down their neighbors' ranches. "We figured you could use some help rebuilding," Henry Walsh said, directing his workers to unload. "And maybe some extra guns if the Boones come calling again." Evelyn felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Henry, I can't ask you to risk—" "You're not asking, we're offering." Henry's normally cheerful face was grim. "Those bastards burned land that's been in production for 15 years. They shot at homes where families sleep. That's not just your problem anymore, Evelyn. That's everyone's problem." Sarah Chen approached, her arms full of blankets. "We also brought supplies for the babies. I heard you've got twins here. They'll need proper bedding and clothes if this keeps up." "Thank you," Evelyn managed. "All of you, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Thomas Ironwood rumbled in his deep bass voice. "Just point us toward what needs fixing and we'll fix it." Over the next 3 days, the ranch transformed again. The reinforcements from Bellwood worked alongside Evelyn's original defenders, rebuilding fences, clearing burned timber, creating fire breaks that would prevent another grass fire from reaching the buildings. They worked with the efficiency of people who knew that time was running out, that the next attack would likely be worse than the last. Jonah worked among them, no longer an outsider, but part of the community. Evelyn watched him teaching Daniel Pritchard how to calm skittish cattle, saw him sharing lunch with Henry Walsh, heard him laugh at one of Thomas Ironwood's terrible jokes. He was becoming part of the fabric of this place, these people. And his boys, those tiny twins who'd started all this with their father's desperate knock on her door, were being passed from arm to arm, cooed over by Mrs. Patterson, examined by Dr. Brennan, played with by Sarah Chen. They were no longer strangers' children. They were the ranch's children, protected by everyone who stood on this burned land. On the third night, as the work crews finished for the day and prepared to return to Bellwood, Evelyn called everyone together. They gathered in the yard, 24 people who'd chosen to stand against power and violence and greed. "I know what you're all risking," Evelyn began. "Your lives, your property, your futures. The Boones won't forget this. Even if we win, even if the marshal comes and arrests them, they have money and influence. They could make your lives difficult for years to come." "Let them try," Henry Walsh said. "We're not afraid of rich men throwing tantrums." "But you should be afraid of rich men with guns," Evelyn continued, "because that's what's coming. Garrett Boone is wounded and humiliated. His father's reputation is being questioned. They're going to come at us with everything they have, and some of us might not survive it." Silence fell over the group. Evelyn let it stretch, making sure everyone understood the stakes. "So I'm giving you all one last chance to walk away. No judgment, no shame. This is my fight, and I'll finish it with or without help, but I won't ask anyone to die for my stubbornness." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thomas Ironwood stepped forward. "Miss Hart, my grandfather was a slave. Worked a plantation in Georgia until the war freed him. He told me once that the only thing separating free men from slaves is the willingness to fight for what's yours, to stand up when powerful people try to push you down." The big man's voice was steady. "I see a woman fighting to keep her land. I see a father fighting to protect his children. I see people standing up to murderers and bullies. That's a fight worth joining, no matter the cost." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Not a single person left. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Then we stand together. And when the Boones come, and they will come, we show them what it means to fight people who have everything to lose and nothing to fear." The group dispersed to their various positions and tasks. Jonah approached Evelyn as she stood alone in the yard, looking at the burned landscape that was somehow still hers. "You know they're coming tomorrow," he said quietly, "or the day after. Garrett won't wait long to respond, not after we humiliated him." "I know. And you know that even with all these people, we might not win. The Boones have more men, more guns, more resources. I know that too." Jonah was quiet for a moment. "So why are we doing this? Why not take Vernon's offer, sell the land, and disappear somewhere they can't find us?" Evelyn turned to look at him. "You remember that first night, when you knocked on my door and asked to sleep in the barn? Of course. I almost said no. Almost sent you away because it was safer, easier, less complicated. And if I had, I'd still be here alone, eating supper by myself, talking to ghosts, waiting to die. She paused. You gave me a reason to fight, Jonah. You and those boys. You reminded me that some things are worth the risk. Even if we lose? Especially if we lose. Because at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have stood for something. She smiled sadly. Thomas used to say that how you face death matters more than when it comes. Better to die fighting for what's right than live forever on your knees. Jonah reached out and took her hand, a simple gesture, but weighted with meaning. Then we fight. Together, no matter what comes. Together, Evelyn agreed. They stood there in the gathering darkness, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other by design, and waited for the storm they both knew was coming. The storm arrived the next afternoon, but not in the form they expected. Instead of Garrett Boone and his hired guns, a contingent of official-looking men rode up the main road flying a federal flag. At their head was a lean man in his 50s wearing a marshal's badge and carrying himself with the authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "Miss Evelyn Hart?" he called out as he dismounted. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "I am. Who's asking?" "Federal Marshal Robert Hayes out of San Antonio. I received your letter 3 days ago. Came as fast as I could." Relief flooded through Evelyn so powerfully she nearly staggered. The messenger had made it. Help had arrived. They weren't alone anymore. "Marshal Hayes, thank you for coming. As you can see," she gestured at the burned pasture land, "things have escalated since I sent that letter." Hayes surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. "So I see. You want to tell me what happened here?" Evelyn told him everything, from Jonah's first arrival to the fires to the shootings. Jonah corroborated her story, adding details about Edmund Tate's murder and the Boone's reach in Kansas. The other defenders added their own testimonies, creating a comprehensive picture of organized violence and intimidation. Hayes listened to it all without interruption, his expression growing darker by the minute. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is a hell of a situation," he finally said. "The Boones have a lot of influence. Douglas Boone has friends in the Kansas territorial government, maybe even in Washington. Taking him on won't be easy." "But you can do it?" Evelyn pressed. "You can arrest them for what they've done?" "I can arrest Garrett Boone for the attacks on your property. I can investigate the murder of Edmund Tate based on Mr. Reed's testimony. Whether any of it sticks against Douglas Boone himself?" Hayes shook his head. "That'll depend on what evidence we can gather and whether a judge has the courage to hear the case." "So they might get away with it." "They might. Powerful men often do." Hayes met her eyes. "But having federal attention on them will make them a lot more careful. They can't afford to keep attacking you openly, not with a marshal watching. And if we can get Garrett Boone in custody, we can start building a case that might reach all the way to his father." It wasn't the guarantee Evelyn had hoped for, but it was something. It was the rule of law, imperfect and slow, but at least pointing in the right direction. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Written statements from everyone who witnessed the attacks. Documentation of damages, any evidence you've gathered." Hayes gestured to his men. "I'm also leaving 2 deputies here temporarily, just in case the Boones try something while we're processing everything. They won't be enough to stop a full assault, but they should discourage casual violence." Over the next several hours, Hayes and his men took statements, photographed damage, and collected evidence. Evelyn watched it all with a mixture of hope and wariness. She'd spent 3 years learning that institutions could fail, that the law wasn't always just, that power often trumped righteousness. But she'd also learned that sometimes, just sometimes, standing up and demanding justice could make a difference. As the sun set, Marshal Hayes prepared to leave for Bellwood, where he planned to set up a temporary headquarters. Before mounting his horse, he approached Evelyn one last time. "I want you to understand something, Miss Hart. What you did here, standing against the Boones, gathering witnesses, documenting everything, that takes real courage. Most people would have run or surrendered. I'm just protecting what's mine. You're doing more than that. You're proving that ordinary people can stand up to power when they have the law on their side." Hayes tipped his hat. "I can't promise this ends the way you want. But I can promise I'll do everything in my authority to see justice done. That's all I'm asking for, Marshal. Justice. Hayes rode away with most of his men, leaving the two promised deputies behind. As darkness fell, Evelyn gathered her defenders once more. The Marshal's here, she told them. That changes things. The Boones can't attack us openly anymore without risking federal charges. This fight isn't over, but the worst of it might be behind us. The relief in the group was palpable. Mrs. Patterson actually laughed. Does this mean we can all go home and sleep in our own beds again? I think so, though I'd appreciate it if you stayed on alert just in case. One by one, the defenders from Bellwood prepared to leave, promising to return if needed, but clearly glad to be going home. Jim Pritchard and his sons were the last to go, and Jim clasped Evelyn's hand firmly. You did good, Evelyn. Thomas would be proud. Thank you, Jim, for everything. That's what neighbors do. We stand together. He glanced at Jonah, who stood nearby with the twins. You take care of her, you hear? She's tougher than she looks, but everyone needs someone watching their back. Jonah nodded. I intend to, sir. When everyone had gone and only the two federal deputies remained on patrol, Evelyn and Jonah stood together in the yard, looking at the ranch that had become a battlefield and somehow survived. It's really over, Jonah said, wonder in his voice. We made it. Maybe, Evelyn cautioned. The Boones still have influence. They might find ways to make trouble. But we're not alone anymore. We have the law on our side. We have witnesses. We have proof. Jonah turned to face her fully. For the first time since Edmund died, I don't feel like I'm running. I feel like I might actually have a chance. Evelyn smiled. We both do. A chance to rebuild, to recover, to actually live instead of just survive. What will you do with the ranch, I mean, once things settle down? Rebuild. Replant. Try to recover some of what was lost. She paused. And I could use help, if you're interested in staying on, that is. Permanent-like, not just until the job's done. Jonah's face transformed with emotion. You mean that? I mean it. You've more than earned a place here, Jonah Reed. You and those boys. If you want it. Want it? Jonah's voice was rough. Miss Hart, Evelyn, I can't think of anything I want more. A home, a future, a place where my sons can grow up safe. Then you've got it. All of it. Evelyn extended her hand. Partners? Jonah took it, his grip firm and warm. Partners. They shook on it there in the darkness. Two people who'd found each other through desperation and chosen each other through courage, and sealed a bond that would define the rest of their lives. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would bring. The legal battle with the Boones might drag on for years. The ranch would take time and money to rebuild. There would be challenges, setbacks, maybe even failures, but they would face it all together, on land they defended with blood and fire, surrounded by neighbors who'd stood beside them when it mattered most. And that, Evelyn thought as she looked at the stars emerging overhead, was worth every risk they'd taken. The 2 weeks that followed Marshal Hayes's arrival carried a strange quality, like the eerie calm that settles after a tornado has passed, but before anyone knows the full extent of the damage. The federal deputies remained on the property, their presence a deterrent against any overt violence. But everyone knew the Boones weren't finished. Men like that didn't simply accept defeat and walk away. The first indication of their new strategy came when a lawyer arrived from Kansas City, a slick-suited man named Richard Caldwell, who represented the Boone family interests. He came with documents, affidavits, and a story that painted Jonah Reed not as a witness to murder, but as a disgruntled son-in-law who'd tried to extort money from Edmund Tate, and when refused, had set the fatal fire himself before fleeing to Texas. Marshal Hayes listened to Caldwell's presentation with a stony expression, then dismissed him with a curt observation that convenient witnesses and purchase testimony wouldn't hold up under federal scrutiny. But the damage was done. Word spread through Bellwood, and beyond that, maybe things weren't as clear-cut as everyone thought. Maybe this Jonah Reed was actually a criminal. Maybe Evelyn Hart had been duped by a smooth-talking drifter with a sob story and 2 babies he probably stole. Vernon Hart, predictably, seized on this narrative with gleeful enthusiasm. He made the rounds in Bellwood, suggesting that Evelyn's judgment had been compromised, that she was being manipulated, that her stubborn defense of Reed only proved she wasn't fit to manage her own affairs, let alone a working ranch. Evelyn heard about it third hand from Henry Walsh, who rode out to warn her. They stood in her kitchen while Jonah fed the twins in the next room, speaking in low voices. "Vernon's filing another petition with the court," Henry said quietly, "claims you're mentally unfit to hold the property. Says your association with Reed and the violence it's brought proves you're incapable of making sound decisions." Evelyn felt cold fury settle in her stomach. "On what grounds?" "Moral turpitude, reckless endangerment, harboring a fugitive." Henry's expression was apologetic. "He's got signatures from people in town. Not many, but enough to make the petition look legitimate." "Who signed it?" "Folks who are scared, mostly. The Boones have deep pockets, and word is they're offering to buy up property in the area at premium prices. Some people see an opportunity. Others are worried that standing against the Boones will make them targets too." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting against the wave of exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. 3 years of fighting, and it never seemed to end. Every victory just revealed a new battlefield, a new way for people to try to take what was hers. "What do I do, Henry?" "You fight it in court, same as before. You get character witnesses. You document everything you've done to maintain and improve the ranch. You show that you're making sound decisions based on evidence, not emotion." He paused. "And you might want to think about whether having Jonah here is helping or hurting your case. You think I should send him away. I think you should consider whether his presence gives Vernon ammunition you can't afford to hand him." Henry's voice was gentle. "I'm not saying it's right, Evelyn. I'm saying it's practical." After Henry left, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table for a long time, her head in her hands. She heard Jonah moving in the other room, heard one of the twins babbling happily, heard the normal sounds of a house that was finally becoming a home. And she thought about what it would mean to send them away. She was still sitting there when Jonah appeared in the doorway, one twin on his hip. "Everything all right?" he asked. Evelyn looked up at him, this man who'd knocked on her door asking for nothing more than a barn to sleep in, and felt something crystallize in her chest. A decision, a choice, a line in the sand. "Vernon's filing a petition to have me declared unfit to own the ranch," she said flatly. "He's using you as evidence that I'm making reckless decisions." Jonah's face went pale. "I'll leave. Tonight. I'll take the boys and—" "No," Evelyn interrupted. "You'll stay. We'll fight this together, same as we fought everything else." "But if I'm the reason—" "You're not the reason, Jonah. Vernon is the reason. His greed is the reason. The Boone's violence is the reason. You're just a convenient excuse." She stood up, her jaw set. "I'm done letting fear dictate my choices. I'm done letting other people tell me what I should do with my own land, my own life, my own future. If Vernon wants to challenge me in court, fine. Let him. But I won't give him an easy victory by backing down now." Jonah shifted the baby to his other hip, his expression torn. "You could lose everything." "I could. But I'd lose it fighting for something I believe in. For someone I believe in." Evelyn met his eyes directly. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Jonah?" Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability mixing with hope. "I think so. But maybe you should say it plain so there's no misunderstanding." Evelyn took a breath, steadying herself. "These past weeks, having you here, having the boys here, it's changed something for me. This ranch stopped being just a memorial to Thomas and became something alive again, became a home again, and I'm not willing to give that up no matter what Vernon or the Boones or anyone else threatens." "Evelyn, I'm not finished," she continued. "I know this is complicated. I know we've got legal battles ahead and rebuilding to do, and 100 practical reasons why this is probably a terrible idea, but I'm asking you to stay anyway. Not just as my employee, as my partner, in the ranch, in the fight, in whatever comes next." Jonah was quiet for a long moment, the baby in his arms watching his face with wide, curious eyes. Then he smiled, slow and genuine and full of warmth. "Sarah used to say that the best things in life are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible, especially then." His voice was soft. "I'd be honored to stay, Evelyn, as your partner in all of it." They stood there in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, and sealed an agreement that was about much more than ranch management or legal defense. It was about choosing each other, deliberately and consciously, in the face of a world that seemed determined to keep them apart. The court hearing was set for 3 weeks later in Bellwood's small courthouse. In the meantime, Evelyn and Jonah worked to prepare their defense. Marshal Hayes, still investigating the Boones' activities, agreed to testify about the attacks on Evelyn's property. Dr. Brennan offered to speak to Evelyn's sound judgment and mental fitness. Jim Pritchard and several other neighbors signed affidavits supporting her, but Vernon had been busy too. He'd gathered his own witnesses, people willing to testify that Evelyn's behavior had become erratic, that she'd endangered the community by harboring a fugitive, that her judgment had been compromised by sentiment or worse. The tension in Bellwood built steadily as the hearing date approached. The town had split into factions, those who supported Evelyn and saw her as someone standing up to bullies, and those who supported Vernon and saw him as trying to save a woman from her own poor choices. 2 days before the hearing, Jonah received word that Marshal Hayes wanted to see him in Bellwood. Evelyn insisted on coming with him. They left the twins with Mrs. Patterson, who'd agreed to watch them for the day, and rode into town together. Hayes met them in his temporary office above the general store. His expression was grim. "I've got news," he said without preamble. "Some of it good, some not." "Let's hear it," Evelyn said. "The good news is we've arrested Garrett Boone. Picked him up in Kansas 3 days ago. He's facing federal charges for the attacks on your property, plus murder charges for Edmund Tate." Jonah's breath caught. "He confessed?" "Not exactly, but we found evidence, witnesses who saw him in the area the night of the fire, a handkerchief with his initials that was found near the burned workshop, financial records showing he'd been paying off local officials." Hayes leaned back in his chair. "It's not airtight, but it's enough to bring him to trial. A real trial, with a federal judge, not someone in the Boones' pocket." "And the bad news?" Evelyn asked, though she already suspected. "Douglas Boone has announced he's coming to Texas personally. Says he wants to address the malicious lies being spread about his family." Hayes' expression darkened. "He's bringing lawyers, money, and political pressure. He's going to fight this with everything he has." "Let him come," Evelyn said coldly. "We're not backing down." "There's more," Hayes continued. "Douglas Boone has filed a civil suit against you for defamation and for harboring his son's attacker. He's claiming that your accusations have damaged his business interests and his family's reputation." Jonah stood up abruptly. "That's insane. We're telling the truth." "Truth is a defense in defamation cases, but you have to prove it. And proving it means going through a trial that could take months, cost thousands of dollars, and destroy your reputation even if you win." Hayes looked at them both seriously. "This is what powerful men do when they can't win through violence. They bury you in legal proceedings until you can't afford to keep fighting." Evelyn felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She'd fought so hard, come so far, and now faced the prospect of being destroyed not by bullets or fire, but by paperwork and lawyers. "What are our options?" she asked quietly. "You could settle. Agree to stop making public accusations about the Boones in exchange for them dropping the suit and leaving you alone. Which means Garrett gets away with murder." "Not necessarily. The federal case proceeds regardless of what you do, but without your public support, without your testimony about the attacks on your property, it becomes harder to prove the broader pattern of intimidation and violence." Hayes sighed. "It's your choice, Miss Hart. You can keep fighting and risk losing everything. Or you can step back, protect yourself, and let the federal government handle the Boones." Evelyn looked at Jonah, who met her eyes with understanding. They'd made a promise to each other to stand together, to see this through. But that promise was made when they thought winning was possible. Now, facing the full weight of the Boones' resources and influence, victory seemed impossibly distant. "Can we have some time to think about it?" Jonah asked. Hayes nodded. "You've got until the hearing day after tomorrow. After that, things get a lot more complicated." They left the marshal's office and walked through Bellwood in silence. The town felt different now, charged with tension and suspicion. People watched them pass, some with sympathy, others with judgment. Vernon's campaign had done its work well. They were almost to the wagon when they passed the small church at the edge of town. On impulse, Evelyn turned toward it. The door was unlocked, the interior cool and quiet. They sat in one of the back pews, neither speaking. Finally, Jonah broke the silence. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about what Thomas would do. He always said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is know when to stop fighting, when to accept that you've done what you can and walk away with your head held high." "Is that what you want to do? Walk away?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time. "Part of me does. The part that's tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of watching everything I've built be threatened over and over again." She paused. "But there's another part of me that can't stomach the idea of letting the Boones win, of letting them get away with murder and intimidation just because they have more money and power." "What does that part want?" "To fight, to stand up and say that this isn't right, that power doesn't make something just, that ordinary people deserve protection from men like Douglas Boone." She turned to look at him. "But it's not just my fight anymore, is it? It's yours too, and the twins. If I keep fighting and we lose, I don't just lose the ranch. You lose any chance at a stable home for your boys." Jonah reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Sarah used to say that home isn't a place. It's people who stand with you when things get hard, who choose you even when choosing you costs them something." He squeezed her hand. "Wherever you go, whatever you decide, that's where home is for me and the boys. So don't make this decision based on what you think I need. Make it based on what you can live with." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "What if I can't live with either choice? What if fighting means losing everything, but giving up means losing myself?" "Then maybe there's a third choice we're not seeing yet." They sat in the quiet church for another hour, talking through options, possibilities, scenarios. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it might just work. The hearing day arrived with clear skies and oppressive heat. The small courthouse was packed with spectators. It seemed like half of Bellwood had turned out to watch Vernon Hart try to take his sister-in-law's ranch. Evelyn sat at the defendant's table with Jonah beside her, both dressed in their best clothes. Across the aisle, Vernon sat with his lawyers, looking smugly confident. In the gallery, she could see supporters and detractors mixed together. Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Brennan in the front row, Henry Walsh a few rows back, strangers whose faces she didn't recognize, but whose presence suggested they'd come to watch the spectacle. And in the very back, arriving just before the proceedings began, was Douglas Boone himself. He was a large man in his 60s, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed everything and everyone like property to be acquired or obstacles to be removed. He didn't acknowledge Evelyn or Jonah, just settled into his seat with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. The judge, a weary-looking man named Harrison Crawford, called the court to order. Vernon's lawyer stood to present their case, laying out a narrative of Evelyn's supposed mental instability, her reckless harboring of a fugitive, her irresponsible decisions that had brought violence to a peaceful community. The testimony was damning. Vernon himself took the stand, painting a picture of a woman consumed by grief and making increasingly erratic choices. Several townspeople testified to the danger the ranch had become, the fires, the shootings, the federal marshals. Everything was technically true, but presented in a way that made Evelyn look unstable rather than besieged. When it was Evelyn's turn to present her defense, her lawyer, a young man from San Antonio who was working mostly for goodwill rather than payment, called Marshall Hayes to the stand. Hayes testified clearly and powerfully about the attacks on Evelyn's property, about the evidence linking the Boones to those attacks, about Jonah's credible testimony regarding Edmund Tate's murder. He made it clear that Evelyn wasn't inviting trouble. She was being targeted for doing the right thing. Then Dr. Brennan testified to Evelyn's sound mind and judgment, her years of successfully managing the ranch, her responsible behavior throughout the crisis. But it was when Jonah took the stand that the real story finally came out. Evelyn's lawyer questioned him about Edmund Tate's murder, about what he'd witnessed, about why he'd run. Jonah answered everything honestly, his voice steady despite the hostile stares from Douglas Boone in the back of the courtroom. Then Vernon's lawyer stood for cross-examination, ready to tear Jonah apart. But before he could ask his first question, Jonah pulled out a folded document from his jacket. "I have something the court should see," he said clearly. The judge frowned. "What is it?" "It's a letter, written by Edmund Tate, 2 days before he died. He gave it to me for safekeeping, told me to open it if anything happened to him. Jonah's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the pages. I didn't open it until last week because I was afraid of what it meant, afraid of making things worse. But I think it's time the truth came out. Vernon's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him, curious. Jonah began to read. The letter was Edmund Tate's confession and testimony, written in his own hand. It detailed months of pressure from Douglas Boone to sell his land, escalating from offers to threats to outright intimidation. It named names, provided dates, described meetings, and most damning of all, it included a signed affidavit stating that if anything happened to him, the court should investigate Douglas Boone and his son Garrett for murder. The courtroom erupted. Douglas Boone stood up, his face purple with rage, shouting that it was a forgery, a lie, a desperate attempt to slander his good name. But the judge called for order and demanded to examine the letter. He looked at it for a long time, then called for a handwriting expert to verify its authenticity. The expert, who happened to be in Bellwood for unrelated business, examined the letter and confirmed it was indeed Edmund Tate's handwriting, complete with his distinctive signature and seal. The judge looked at Douglas Boone. "Mr. Boone, I think you need to speak with Marshal Hayes immediately." What followed was chaos. Douglas Boone tried to leave the courthouse, but Hayes's deputies blocked the doors. Within minutes, Boone was in custody, the hearing forgotten in the face of this new evidence. Vernon's petition was dismissed almost as an afterthought, the judge noting dryly that a woman who'd successfully defended her property against murderous criminals was clearly mentally competent. As the courtroom cleared, Evelyn turned to Jonah. "You had that letter this whole time?" "I found it a week ago, hidden in the twins' carrier where Edmund must have put it the night before he died. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure if I should use it, if it would just make things worse." Jonah looked exhausted but relieved. "But when I heard Vernon's lawyer tearing you apart for helping me, I realized I couldn't let that stand, not when I had the power to end this." Evelyn pulled him into a fierce hug, not caring who saw. "You did the right thing." Outside the courthouse, they found a crowd waiting. Marshal Hayes stood on the steps, making an announcement. Douglas Boone was being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, intimidation of witnesses, and a host of other federal crimes. Garrett Boone's trial would proceed with his father beside him in the dock. The reign of terror was over. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, others looked worried about what this meant for the region's stability. But Evelyn only cared about the people who mattered. Mrs. Patterson was crying happy tears. Dr. Brennan was shaking Jonah's hand. Jim Pritchard was telling anyone who'd listened that he'd known from the start that Evelyn Hart was innocent. Vernon Hart slipped away without a word, his dreams of acquiring the ranch shattered for good. That evening, back at the ranch, Evelyn and Jonah sat on the porch while the twins played on a blanket between them. The sun was setting over the burned pastures, painting everything gold and orange. "What happens now?" Jonah asked. "Now we rebuild. The pastures will recover. Grass always comes back after a fire, stronger than before. We'll replant, repair the fences, get the cattle back to proper grazing." Evelyn smiled. "It'll take time, but we've got time now. The Boones won't be bothering us anymore." "And us?" Jonah's voice was careful. "What happens with us?" Evelyn reached over and took his hand. "I meant what I said about being partners. In all of it. The ranch, the work, the life we're building here. Even knowing it won't be easy, that people will talk, that Vernon will probably keep causing trouble, that we've got years of hard work ahead. Especially knowing that," Evelyn squeezed his hand, "I've spent 3 years alone, Jonah. 3 years of eating supper by myself and talking to ghosts. I'm done with that. I want noise and chaos and those boys tracking mud through my clean kitchen. I want arguments about crop rotation and debates about whether to expand the herd. I want a life that's messy and complicated and real." Jonah smiled, that slow, genuine smile that transformed his face. "Sarah would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who could keep me honest. And Thomas would have liked you. He always said I needed someone who wasn't afraid of hard work or stubborn women." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the twins discover their own toes with absolute fascination. Somewhere in the distance, one of the cattle lowed. A bird called from the barn's reconstructed roof. The ranch was alive again, breathing with possibility. "We should probably talk about the practical things," Jonah said eventually, "like where I'm sleeping now that we're partners." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Well, the room off the kitchen is yours for as long as you want it." Or, she trailed off, suddenly feeling like a nervous girl again. Or? Or we could start courting, properly. Do things right. Give the town something to talk about besides violence and court cases. Jonah's smile widened. "Courting. I like the sound of that. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible dancer." "I remember you saying that. Something about not wanting to look stupid." "And Sarah said we'd learn together so neither of us would look stupid." Jonah's voice was soft with memory. "I think she'd approve of us learning together again, building something new while honoring what we lost." "I think so too." As the stars began to emerge overhead, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that keeps you moving when you want to quit, but the genuine kind that makes you excited for tomorrow. The ranch had survived fire and violence. She had survived grief and loneliness. Together, they'd survived powerful men who thought they could take whatever they wanted. And now, finally, they could start living instead of just surviving. The twins, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere, both began fussing at the same time. Evelyn and Jonah moved in perfect synchronization, each scooping up a baby, rocking and soothing with the practiced ease of people who'd learned to work as a team. "You know," Evelyn said, bouncing little Caleb gently, "I never thought I'd have children. Spent years accepting that it just wasn't meant to be." "And now you've got two," Jonah pointed out. "Instant family. Instant chaos, more like." But her smile was genuine. "Though I wouldn't change it for anything." The babies settled, content in their arms. Evelyn looked at Jonah over their small heads and saw her future reflected in his eyes. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard years ahead, struggles with drought and debt and all the challenges that came with ranching in Texas. There would be gossip from people who didn't approve, legal complications to navigate, memories of Thomas and Sarah that would sometimes ache. But they would face it all together, on land they'd defended with blood and courage, surrounded by neighbors who'd proven their worth when it mattered most. "You know what Thomas used to say?" Evelyn asked softly. "What?" "Home isn't the land you inherit. It's the land you fight for. The people you choose. The life you build from scratch, even when everyone says it's impossible." She looked around at the ranch, damaged but standing, broken but healing. "I think we've built something worth keeping." "I think so too." Years later, when people asked Evelyn Hart about that summer, about the fires and the violence and the stand against the Boones, she would tell them the story simply. A man knocked on her door asking for shelter. She said yes. And that single choice changed everything. But what she rarely mentioned, what she kept close to her heart like a secret treasure, was the moment she opened that door and saw Jonah Reed holding his infant sons. The moment she made her choice, not out of kindness, but out of recognition. Seeing in his exhausted face her own fight for survival, her own refusal to surrender, her own stubborn determination to protect what was hers. That moment hadn't just changed her life. It had saved it. And now, sitting on her porch with a man she'd chosen and children she'd claimed and land she'd defended, Evelyn finally understood what Thomas had been trying to tell her all those years ago. Home wasn't something you inherited from the past. It was something you chose to build every single day, with courage and stubbornness and love. And this ranch, this family, this life they were creating together, this was home. The twins fell asleep in their arms as the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new battles to fight. But tonight, they had peace. They had each other. And that was more than enough. In the distance, a coyote called out to the Texas night. The sound that had once seemed lonely now felt like a benediction, a wild blessing on all who had the courage to stand their ground and fight for what they loved. Evelyn Hart had started with nothing but 60 acres and determination. Now she had a partner, 2 sons, a community that had proven its loyalty, and a future that stretched out before her like the endless Texas sky. She had held the line. She had stood her ground. And in doing so, she had discovered what it truly meant to be home.